Since we're talking about quality animal foods and the importance of having raw animal foods in the diet, this is the perfect time to talk about my favorite subject, real milk. What is real milk? Real milk is milk that has all the fat, that comes from cows on pasture, eating the food appropriate to cows. And we've talked about the fat and the pasture feeding. We know why these are important. But the third component of real milk is that it's unprocessed, that has not been pasteurized, that it is raw, which of course is a word that sends convulsions through the FDA. Who would have you believe that drinking raw milk is like playing Russian roulette with your health? So let's explore this premise that raw milk is inherently dangerous. That's what they say, raw milk is inherently dangerous. Actually, raw milk is uniquely safe. Let's consider the calf born in the muck and the manure, and the first thing it does is stand up and suckles on its mother's manure-covered teat. How can that calf survive? How has any mammal in the universe survived with such a filthy system that is non-FDA approved? How could they do such a thing? Well, because Mother Nature is smarter than the FDA, and she has created this substance, raw milk, which is absolutely amazing. Raw milk contains multiple redundant systems of bioactive components that can reduce or eliminate populations of pathogenic bacteria. I'm going to quickly go through some of these components. This is not meant to be exhaustive or detailed. One of them is lactoperoxidase, which is an enzyme that actually creates hydrogen peroxide and free radicals, and these seek out and destroy pathogens. And lactoperoxidase is in all mammalian secretions. It's in breast milk, it's in tears, and it's actually, the levels are higher in animal milk than in human milk, and that stands to reason because animals are dirtier and you have more to deal with in the animal milk. Lactoperoxidase levels are 10 times higher in goat milk than in breast milk. Another is lactoferrin. We are just beginning to discover the wonders of lactoferrin. It is plentiful in raw milk. It is effectiveness is reduced by pasteurization. Lactoferrin works by stealing iron away from pathogens, and then it helps the infant absorb all the iron. It also stimulates the immune system. Lactoferrin is particularly useful in fighting things like tuberculosis and candida. It may be beneficial for weight loss and has many other benefits that are being discovered. Lactoferrin is actually being sold as a supplement now, when all we need to do is get it from our raw milk. There are many other protective components in raw milk: polysaccharides, medium-chain fatty acids, antibodies, leukocytes, which are white blood cells. These all kill bad bacteria or strengthen the immune system. White blood cells. Milk is like blood. It contains white blood cells that produce antibodies to specific bacteria that you encounter. B lymphocytes, macrophages, neutrophils, T lymphocytes. I mean, the list goes on and on. Immunoglobulins. These are all components that kill bad bacteria and strengthen or program the immune system to get rid of bad bacteria and pathogens. There's more. B12 binding protein. This does double duty. Not only steals B12 away from pathogens, but it also helps the infant absorb all of the B12 in the milk. Bifidus factor. This is the good bacteria, the bacteria that's so important to have in the digestive tract. Fibronectin and something called glycomacropeptide. So all of these components are there active in raw milk. This is what happens when you pasteurize. Here we have breast milk, they're all active. Raw milk, they're all active. When you pasteurize, they're inactivated or reduced. Only one stays active. And then in the ultra-high temperature milk, the UHT milk, we have much more inactivation, and also in the infant formula. So when you pasteurize, you are deactivating these enzymes that have all of these important roles to play, and you actually get rid of the protection when you pasteurize. So if you get bad bacteria in the pasteurized milk, you really have a problem. Whereas if bad bacteria get in the raw milk, they're taken care of, unless the system is overwhelmed. You can get a situation where there's so many pathogens in the milk that it is overwhelmed. But under reasonable standards of cleanliness, raw milk protects itself and gets rid of pathogens. The real problems in foodborne illness are not coming from milk, whether raw or pasteurized, but from salads and fruits and vegetables, which we are, of course, encouraged to eat raw, and there's no law that these need to be pasteurized. What people don't realize is that there have been many deadly outbreaks from pasteurized milk, some of which have actually killed many people. Once again, the problem is the pasteurization, which gets rid of all the protective components. We cannot get rid of pathogens. We cannot avoid pathogens. The money that pays for our food contains pathogens. Soy products contain pathogens. In surveys with soy foods, they found salmonella and all sorts of microorganisms in not only the soy milk, but the soy powders had these microorganisms. Breast milk contained pathogens. That's a common misconception. Until recently, the medical profession claimed that breast milk was sterile. They thought our guts were sterile and then breast milk was sterile. We now know that breast milk contains pathogens, often at very high levels. And this was discovered in a study in China. They were setting up a breast milk bank, and they tested the breast milk, and they were shocked at the high levels of pathogens in the breast milk. And then they learned that the custom in China is for mothers not to bathe for a whole month after they've had a baby. This is a very wise custom, because what it does is program that baby to be immune for life to any pathogen that it encounters that first month of life. Now, as far as I know, mothers have not yet been forced to pasteurize their breast milk before giving it to their babies. Yet laws prevent mothers from obtaining raw milk to feed their babies if their own supply is inadequate, or if for some reason they can't breastfeed, if they've adopted or whatever. So there's a real discrimination here against mothers who are not breastfeeding for whatever reason. There is a tremendous amount of bias and outright fraud in many of the reports in the literature of outbreaks caused by raw milk. The FDA and the USDA will cite all of these studies about problems caused by raw milk. But when you look carefully at the reports of these outbreaks, you find that this is not necessarily the case. Just want to give you a couple examples of this type of bias. One was a 1983 outbreak in Georgia. It was Campylobacter infection in Atlanta. At that time, there was a raw milk dairy outside of Atlanta, and they fingered this raw milk dairy. They failed to find Campylobacter or any other pathogen in any milk products from the dairy, and all safety measures had been followed faithfully. But the authors concluded that the only means available to ensure the public's health would be proper pasteurization before consumption. And this report led to the closing of that raw milk dairy in Georgia. Another one is one that we were very familiar with in 2001 in Wisconsin. An outbreak of Campylobacter was blamed on raw milk from a cow share program, and this farm had an outstanding safety record. They just received an award for the safety of their milk, and they had a little cow share program there. And on the CDC website, they will tell you will read that 70 to 75 people got ill, but actually independent investigations found that over 800 got ill during this 12-week period. The likely cause was underdone hamburger. Only 24 of the cow share owners became ill, and most had consumed this hamburger at a local restaurant, and there was no illness in the remaining 361 cow share owners drinking raw milk. So that's very bad epidemiology to blame this outbreak on raw milk, but that's what they did. The bias crept in from what happened at the local hospitals. If you went in and were sick, the first question they asked you was, did you drink raw milk? If you said yes, you were admitted and you became part of the record. If you said no, you were sent home and were not put in the record. And independent lab tests found no Campylobacter in this raw milk. And yet, this is plastered on the CDC website as this terrible outbreak from raw milk. The FDA created a PowerPoint last year citing 15 studies as reasons to avoid raw milk, and had that same phrase, drinking raw milk is like playing Russian roulette with your health. Well, we had a researcher recently look very carefully at this PowerPoint, and what they found was that 100% of the studies cited had something wrong with them. Either they didn't get a valid sample or there was no statistical association. In almost half of the studies, the findings were misrepresented in the FDA's PowerPoint. The FDA said it was raw milk when the study didn't say it was raw milk. So just be very careful when you hear the government citing all these studies showing that raw milk is dangerous, because when you start to look carefully at these studies, you find a lot of fraud, a lot of misrepresentation. Listeria monocytogenes is a deadly food pathogen. Raw milk is often blamed for this. But we have found a 2003 USDA report which compared raw milk to deli meats. And it was found that there were 515 times more illnesses from Listeria monocytogenes from deli meats and 29 times more from pasteurized milk. And on a per serving basis, that's, illness per serving. And this is a really important statistic. The deli meats were 10 times more likely to cause illness. FDA is often saying raw milk is inherently dangerous and should not be consumed. How come they're not saying this about deli meats? They're a lot more dangerous than raw milk is. The truth is that compared to 30 to 50 years ago, dairy farmers can take advantage of many advancements that contribute to a safe product. We know how to manage herds with rotational grazing so the cows are always healthy. We know how to test for disease. We have refrigeration. And best of all, we have much easier milk testing techniques, so we can show a record of safety week by week. In California, since 1999, Organic Pastures Dairy has sold over 40 million servings of raw milk or raw milk products without one reported illness. They've performed over 1,300 tests on the milk and never found a human pathogen, not in the milk and not even in the manure on the farm. During that same period, since 1999, there have been 19 recalls of pasteurized milk products during that same period, and that's just in California. We did have what was called a milk problem in the 1800s. There was a 50% death rate in children in the inner cities drinking raw milk. And this milk came from the swill dairies. These were confinement dairies where the cows were fed the brewery swill from the breweries in the cities. Unimaginable filth and also very poor quality milk. The milk was so thin that they had to add chalk to it to make it look white. It was solved not by pasteurization, but by outlawing these dairies. The certified raw milk movement came along, which ensured clean raw milk and finally increased consumer access to refrigeration. This is what solved the milk problem. The death rates had gone way, way down long before mandatory pasteurization came in. Pasteurization takes the credit, but it was not pasteurization that solved the milk problem. So in summary, raw milk is safer than any other food. It's the only food with its own built-in safety mechanism. And claims that raw milk is unsafe are based on 40-year-old science and would not hold up in a court of law. And we're looking forward to our day in court. Meanwhile, pasteurized milk is causing increased health problems in children. This is in the literature. The doctors know this. If a child is suffering from allergies, asthma, frequent ear infections, gastrointestinal problems, the first thing they do is take them off of milk. This is, of course, pasteurized milk, and it works. They get better. And pasteurized milk is also associated with diabetes, autoimmune disease, attention deficit disorder, behavior problems, and so forth. What people don't realize is that there are now many pathogens in pasteurized milk that are heat resistant. including the Johne's bacteria associated with Crohn's disease and many types of spores for pathogens and protozoa. The real tragedy of pasteurization is what it does to the proteins in milk. The proteins in milk are unusual in the protein world because they're very large, they're very complicated, and they're very fragile. They're like great big tinker toys. Here's an example of one. This is lactoferrin. That's a protein with all of these precise foldings and precise angles. And these are the antimicrobial components. These are the carriers for vitamins and minerals. These are what protect us against disease. When you pasteurize or ultra-pasteurize, you're subjecting them to high heat very quickly, and it's basically like smashing your hand on a bunch of tinker toys. It warps and distorts and breaks up these proteins, and the body doesn't recognize them anymore and thinks that they are foreign. And this is why milk is associated, pasteurized milk is associated with immune attacks and juvenile diabetes, autoimmune diseases, asthma, and so forth later in life. More and more people are simply unable to consume pasteurized milk, and the consumption of fluid milk in this country is declining relentlessly at 1% per year, as more and more people are just simply avoiding this food that's so difficult to digest. And raw milk, on the other hand, digests itself. The body does not have to put any energy into digesting milk. What a wonderful system for the infant whose digestive tract is not on track yet. What a wonderful food for people with compromised digestion. The enzymes and the carrier proteins ensure that all the nutrients are absorbed. The friendly bacteria aid in digestion. You have a net energy gain when you consume raw milk, whereas pasteurized milk is very difficult to digest. The body has to make all those enzymes to digest it, has to deal with the warped and distorted proteins, and you actually, in many cases, end up with an energy loss. You're actually putting more energy into digesting that milk than you get out of it. Raw milk is healthier. The nutrients levels may be the same. There may be the same amount of calcium in raw and pasteurized milk, but the calcium in the raw milk is much more available. These were studies done at a place called Ranley Farm in the late 30s. This is a rat fed only raw milk. It has good development, very nice, healthy fur. These rats were fed pasteurized milk. They're smaller, and they have hairless places due to B6 deficiency. The pasteurization really is very hard on B6, that fragile vitamin. And then they did an autopsy, and here's the very important part. The rats on the raw milk had denser bones, and they were longer. They had much better building of the bones and the bone structure, and this is really key to what we're talking about today, building that body so it has good bone structure for life. That's why it's so important in the Western world, where milk is the source of calcium, for our children to have access to raw milk. So they really start off with good bone structure. This was a study done with guinea pigs in 1941. Those on whole raw milk had excellent growth and no abnormalities. Those on pasteurized milk had poor growth, muscle stiffness, emaciation and weakness, and they died within a year. And when they did the autopsy, what did they find? They found the calcium in the wrong places, deposited in the skin, joints, heart, and other organs. And I can't stress enough that atherosclerosis is the buildup of calcium in the arteries. Is pasteurized milk contributing to atherosclerosis? I think you can make a very good case for this being so. This is my favorite study. These were rats, 1931. Very good science here. Those on whole raw milk had good growth, sleek coats, they had clear eyes, and they were nice little rats. They liked to be picked up and petted by the researchers. Those on pasteurized milk had rough coats, slow growth, their eyes lacked luster, they were anemic. Lactoferrin was gone, they were not absorbing the iron. Loss of vitality and weight, and they were not very nice little rats. They were irritable and tended to bite when handled. Now you take a family where you've got difficult children, and believe me, this is something we need to be very sympathetic about. The children are always upset, always crying, always difficult, hard to handle, behavior problems, tantrums. And the parents make one change in the diet. They switch from pasteurized milk to raw milk. We've had many letters like this. I can't believe the change in my child. I thought my child was a devil. My child is an angel now. We're really enjoying him. He's fun to be with. He's clever. He's funny. He's learning in school. He's a delight to be around. And your government says you can't have that magic food. It will make your children turn from devils into angels. Since ancient times, the milk cure, a diet of exclusive raw milk, has been used to cure many diseases. The Mayo Clinic was set up to administer the milk cure in the early 1900s. And it was used very successfully to treat cancer, weight loss, kidney problems, all sorts of problems, including chronic fatigue, even cancer. It only works with raw milk. If you gave people an exclusive diet of pasteurized milk, it would make them very sick. So you see what the milk is doing, the raw milk is doing. It spares their digestion. It relieves the body of having to put energy into digestion so it can put energy into healing. And at the same time, it's providing a complete food in such a way that all the nutrients are absorbed. No wonder so many diseases are cured by raw milk. The FDA and USDA says, well, don't pay any attention to the Weston A. Price Foundation. All they do is drag out old studies, and these studies aren't valid anymore. This is sort of like saying the law of gravity doesn't work anymore because Newton discovered it 300 years ago. Well, we do have a recent study that is an amazing study. It's called the Parseval study, and they looked at almost 15,000 children in Europe and all the risk factors for asthma. And they found that drinking raw milk in the early life, in the first year of life, was the number one protective factor against asthma. It was more protective than living on a farm or having pets or anything else. Not just asthma, but also various types of allergies. Now, we have a situation today where about 5,500 people in the U.S. die from asthma every year. And we have about 1,200 people dying in the U.S. from foodborne pathogens. So the risk of dying from asthma is over 4 times greater than the risk of dying from foodborne pathogens from all sources, and infinitely greater than the risk of dying from raw milk. So, and yet, your government says you can't have this food. We also did a survey on lactose intolerance. This was a nationwide survey. And the results indicated that about 29 million people in the United States are lactose intolerant. We did a smaller survey in Michigan, which indicated that 90% of those diagnosed with lactose intolerance can drink raw milk without problems. 9 out of 10 people who think they can't drink milk do fine on raw milk. Thus, about 26 million Americans diagnosed as lactose intolerant can benefit from raw milk. And finally, of course, we have the confinement system, which puts the animals indoors. This is so ironic. Here are these animals in confinement eating bakery waste and soybeans and donuts and things like that. And out here is this perfect pasture for them to feed on. So there's really something wrong with the system. The average lifespan is 42 months for a confinement animal. A cow on pasture can live up to 15 years. And many cows fall down. If this cow is still alive but just lame, they can use it in hamburger. And most fast food hamburger comes from these lame cows. And of course, bred to have very large udders, the modern cow needs to be milked 3 times per day. Often they take these cows, they milk them for 600 days without a break, and then they die. And this is a milk tanker. That's what the milk is carried in. I have a hard time imagining how they clean out this tanker. There's surely are crevices in there where that milk gets stuck in there. This is the milk processing factory, and this is the inside. Miles of pipes in here. And one thing that happens when you pasteurize is that the milk sticks to the pipes after it's pasteurized. And you need very strong solvents to clean them. And of course, you're going to get residues in the milk, for sure. We're also concerned about the feed given to cows in confinement, because as any mother knows, what she eats will have an effect on her child coming out in her milk. And we've got the soy. Very interesting. We had a letter from a grandmother who had a grandson on soy formula, and he was developing some very serious problems. They put him on raw milk. The problems went away. Then they found some milk closer by where the farmer was feeding soy, and they put the baby on this raw milk from the soy-fed cows, and the problems came back. The same problems that he was having on soy milk. Genetically engineered grains, very susceptible to rot and aflatoxins. The cows are fed bakery waste full of trans fats. And one very popular food for dairy cows is citrus peel cake, which is loaded with pesticides, some very toxic pesticides. Hormones and antibiotics, of course. And now what they're getting is the pellets from the ethanol production. So we're right back to the swill dairies again. Meanwhile, as this industry becomes more and more concentrated and more small farms go out of business, we have a wasteland in a nation that has some of the most fertile pasture in the world. You see these dilapidated barns in the middle of beautiful fields with no animals in these fields. Something is very, very wrong with this system. We're sitting on a pot of gold and we don't even know it. Very often in these Midwestern towns, you can't even buy butter in the towns. So we have a terrible thing that's happened, and I believe that compulsory pasteurization laws are largely responsible for the decline of rural life in America. All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Secondly, it is violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as self-evident. And I'm very happy to report on the progress that we've made. We've gone from the first to the second stage here. And that is why we created the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. Come back to that in a moment. What does this slide have to do with milk? Well, these were photographs taken by Weston Price, and this was a traditional family, and the grandmother went fishing every day. She had a food provider role to bring fish to her beautiful daughters and her grandchildren. Now, the role of grandparents today would not be to go out and fish, but I think a wonderful role for grandmothers or even grandfathers would be the person who picks up the raw milk every week and brings it to your grandchildren. You know, your children are very busy being a parent, and many of them, of course, working full-time. They often need help, and I can't think of a more wonderful thing for grandparents to do than be raw milk grannies or raw milk grandpas. So you be the one that organizes the cow share or finds the dairy or even buys the cow, and make sure that your grandchildren growing up get that raw milk. There's no greater gift that you can give them. We have a lot of resources, and we're always adding to them. The Real Milk website, which where we have detailed scientific information about raw milk. We list raw milk regulations by state, and we list sources of raw milk. And if you can't find a source of raw milk on realmilk.com, because they're not all listed there, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, then contact the local chapter of the Weston A. Price Foundation. Very few of our members are unable to obtain raw milk. And we've just set up the Legal Defense Fund, which provides legal defense for small farmers. You'll be hearing more about that this weekend. And we feel that it's in the nick of time. We've modeled it on the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and we feel that this is going to make a huge difference, not only for raw milk farmers, but for any farmer engaged in direct sales. Now we get to number 4. This is a hard one. The first 3 that we talked about were easy. This is hard. Eliminate refined sweeteners. And I know because I've been there. I couldn't eat just one cookie from the package. I had to eat the whole package of cookies. So, yeah, this is the hard one. So when we talk about refined sweeteners, we mean sugar, of course, dextrose, fructose, glucose, anything ending in OSE, high fructose corn syrup, and we include fruit juices in this list. They are basically nothing but sugar, refined sugar. And the worst thing you can do is start your children off on these fruit juices. Sucrose is actually a disaccharide that breaks down in digestion to glucose and fructose. And in animal studies, they first studied sugar, a diet of 30% sugar, and the animals developed lots and lots of problems. And then they decided to redo the studies with one group of animals getting glucose and the other getting fructose. And they found that the glucose did not really create nearly as many problems as the fructose. So it's the fructose part of the sugar that is the really harmful part of the disaccharide. They found that the livers of these rats on the high fructose diet resembled the livers of alcoholics because all fructose needs to be metabolized in the liver. The male rats did not reach adulthood. They were anemic. They had heart hypertrophy, pathological swelling of the heart. Actually, what happens is the heart enlarged and exploded. Delayed testicular development in the male rats, and in combination with copper deficiency, and copper deficiency is very widespread in this country, the fructose interfered with collagen production. So the rats did not have good integrity in their bodies, and that's why they had the heart hypertrophy. So you think of a growing child building the tendons, building collagen to hold the body together. You don't want these children to be on a high fructose diet. They shouldn't be getting fruit juice and all of these foods with fructose in it. And yet high fructose corn syrup is put in a lot of foods aimed at children. In fact, what's happened in the last 20, 30 years is that the consumption of sugar has declined. The use of high fructose corn syrup has really gone up, and so we have a big increase in total sweeteners. And list of diseases. I hate to keep showing you this list of diseases, but all the diseases associated with consumption of refined sweeteners, diabetes and hypoglycemia, of course, high blood sugar and low blood sugar, elevated insulin, heart disease and cancer. People who eat a lot of sugar get sick more often. Digestive problems, liver and kidney disease, infertility. I mean, the list goes on. Headaches, problems with the endocrine system, obesity, increased desire for alcohol and coffee and tobacco. Sugar is the first addiction, and the others follow behind it. And then, of course, the bone loss, tooth decay, and the behavior problems, hyperactivity, violent tendencies, and depression. Now, notice that I didn't say don't eat sweet things. I said don't eat refined sugar. We do have a sweet taste in our mouth, just like we have a salt taste in our mouth. And this cannot be denied. You don't want to, in raising children, be so strict about sweets that they never get sweet things. I think it's very important for children to receive sweet things from their parents in moderation. Remember that dessert is something you deserve. That comes after you've eaten your dinner. So by natural sweeteners, we mean sweeteners that still have all the nutrients in them that they had in the beginning. For example, Rapadura, which is dehydrated cane sugar juice. There it is there. Maple syrup, maple sugar. Very rich in minerals. Molasses, of course, is all the wonderful nutrients that they take out of the sugar to make white sugar. Stevia powder is an herb that tastes very sweet, and then, of course, the unrefined honey. So these used in moderation in desserts that you've made yourself, full of good fats like butter, egg yolks, and cream, or nuts. These are fine, and in fact, I think important in our diets, especially in the diets of children. Remember, mother's milk is very sweet, so we don't want to, go to all the trouble to breastfeed and then suddenly deny your child sweet things. What causes sugar cravings? What causes overindulgence in sweet things? I don't have any answers. I have some theories. These include wrong fats in the diets, improper preparation of grains, too few or too many animal foods, mineral deficiencies, and the neurotoxic additives such as MSG and aspartame. What I do know is that we've received numerous letters, and this is my own experience as well. When you get on this nutrient-dense diet, you get the activators in your diet and plenty of fats. The cravings go away. It's not a question of willpower anymore. It's a question of just not wanting these sweet things. And of course, here they are. Not only very, very sweet, but loaded with all sorts of other questionable ingredients. And I hate to pick out ice cream because I know it's a wonderful food, and a lot of people are getting their fats and calcium from ice cream. It's interesting how many writers who are urging low-fat diets admit to binging on ice cream. But there is one big problem with the ice cream besides the heavy use of sweeteners. And that is the fact that when you take it out of the freezer, commercial ice cream is soft. Have you ever made your own ice cream? You have to let it melt a little bit after you've taken it out of the freezer. Why is commercial ice cream soft? Because it contains antifreeze, propyl glycol. And antifreeze is a poison. It's a poison to the kidneys. You can actually kill somebody with antifreeze. What happens is their kidneys sort of harden up with crystals. So, do I mean that you should never eat ice cream again? Heaven forbid. Ice cream is a delicious food and a very nutritious food if you make it yourself. The basic ingredients for homemade ice cream are a good quality cream, preferably raw, natural sweetener like maple syrup, some egg yolks, and vanilla. That's all. Just mix that together. And then how many of you have an ice cream maker, the kind where the canister sits in the freezer? Wonderful piece of equipment. So you just pour in the ice cream mix, and in 20 minutes you have ice cream. I put it in a shallow container so that I only need to take it out of the freezer for a few minutes before I can dip into it. You might want to add a little vodka or something to it. That'll make it softer. Or a liqueur, maybe. And there's your delicious ice cream. So ice cream is a great food, and I don't want you to come away from this seminar thinking that a healthy diet is a hard diet or one that deprives you in any way. Which gives the most energy, carbohydrates or fats? We took this from a biochemistry textbook. 1 molecule of glucose requires 15 enzymes and numerous vitamins and minerals, especially chromium and magnesium, and you end up with 38 units of ATP. That's the energy carrier in the cell. Whereas 1 molecule of fat requires only 5 enzymes, far fewer vitamins and minerals, and you get 146 units of ATP in the cell. I think of the Swiss athletes, their favorite dish for their athletic contest was bowls of pure cream. That's what Dr. Price described. They were using this principle. There's a lot more energy from fat than carbohydrates. Number 5, this one is also difficult. You won't be able to do this 100%, but do the best you can. Eliminate toxic metals and additives as much as possible. Aluminum is a big concern. You want to avoid aluminum cookware, but there's other sources of aluminum: antacids, commercial salt, baking powder, and deodorants. Very concerned about these deodorants that people are using. Mercury. Now, we hear a lot about mercury in fish, but the real problem and the real source of mercury is the amalgam fillings, which are constantly outgassing mercury into your mouth. You have a certain amount of protection from mercury in fish if you have good gut bacteria. They will prevent the absorption of mercury in the food you eat, but you don't have much protection from the filling that's outgassing mercury into your mouth, and it's absorbed that way. Now, if you have a mouthful of amalgam fillings and you don't have any health problems, that's fine. But if you're dealing with intractable health problems, I would look into replacing the mercury fillings with composites. Lead comes from lead pipes, some cookwares and glazes, enamels, and dark hair dyes is a source of lead. And of course, it's also in the atmosphere in our pollution. Now, we need iron. Iron is very important in the body, but we want natural iron from food. The white flour products and the cereals have a inorganic iron that's added to it. It's actually like iron filings. You can actually pull it out with a magnet. And this is leading to a toxic iron buildup and conditions such as hemochromatosis, which can contribute to heart disease and liver problems. And cadmium tends to build up in commercially raised fruits and vegetables. This is one good reason for going organic, one of many. And then there's fluoride. Now, fluoride is a huge problem. It's, of course, promoted as something that's healthy, that has no side effects, but fluoride is a thyroid depressant and an enzyme inhibitor. And these two things lead to all of these other problems, not only degeneration, problems with the bones and teeth, cancer, but violent behavior. There's a big concern that the fluoride is causing violent behavior. And then we have the additives. The average American eats 9 pounds of chemical additives per year. I don't need to read off this list. It's just shocking what is put in our food. And they're not always on the label. If an industry uses an additive across the board, that's called an industry standard, and it is not put on the label. The worst additives are the neurotoxic additives, the ones that are toxic to the nervous system. MSG is, of course, in all our processed food, monosodium glutamate, and hydrolyzed protein, which is the same as MSG. It's just a different word for it. They call it hydrolyzed protein, so they don't have to label it as MSG. And aspartame, the artificial sweetener. These neurotoxins are found in reduced fat milks, anything hydrolyzed, anything microwaved, and in processed products containing flavorings, natural flavorings, or spices. They're hidden there so they don't have to put MSG on the label. And the FDA lets them get away with this. I strongly urge you to read the book Excitotoxins by Russell Blaylock, who talks about the vast body of research indicating the problem that MSG causes to the central nervous system. And this is a diagram of what happens at a high concentration when these nerve cells are exposed to MSG, but even lower concentration, the same thing happens. It just takes longer. This is what happens when the MSG gets across the blood-brain barrier, which is particularly weak in young people and the elderly, and in people with certain deficiencies such as magnesium, calcium, or cholesterol deficiency. The big rise in violent crime that began in the early 1960s was kind of puzzling, but people who have studied MSG believe that one big factor is the huge amount of MSG that came into the food supply in the late 1950s. I remember when my mother brought home that first package of spaghetti sauce mix and how good it made the spaghetti sauce taste. And that powdered mix was almost pure MSG. And that's when they started adding it to baby food. They say they don't do that anymore, but look on the labels. If it's got hydrolyzed protein in it, that's MSG. And the big problem with MSG in the growing child is that it affects the hypothalamus. It damages the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is the seat of impulse control. So is this what we're seeing here? Children who no longer have any impulse control. It's a theory that needs to be looked into. And then we have the artificial sweeteners, aspartame, which is sold as Equal or NutraSweet. Huge list of problems, neurological problems caused by aspartame. The FDA's had more complaints about aspartame than any other element in the food supply. So the industry has come up with a new sweetener called sucralose, which they say is not going to have any of these problems, but it does have problems. It caused a lot of problems in the animal studies. And the thing I want to conclude here on these artificial sweeteners is that they're not necessary. It's okay to eat natural sweeteners, and we have plenty of choices for our natural sweeteners. There's no need to have these artificial sweeteners out there in the food supply. Number 6, be kind to your grains, and your grains will be kind to you. This rule applies to all seed foods, grains, legumes, nuts, and other seeds. And this is a diagram of a grain. This is a diagram of a grain of wheat. There's 3 main parts. This is the bran, the outer part, which is like that plastic coating on the grain. And it's got a lot of inhibitors, a lot of phytic acid, also a lot of minerals there. And this is the germ. That's where a lot of the vitamins are and the essential fatty acids. And then this is the starchy portion where all the calories are, but very few nutrients. That's what white flour comes from, the endosperm. And the first way that we're cruel to our grain is we split all these parts into three. And mostly are using the white flour part if people are eating wheat germ, but in splitting it off, it becomes rancid. And then people are even eating oat bran or wheat bran, which is full of all the inhibitors, can cause serious digestive problems. Another way that we're cruel to our grains is we add artificial vitamins to the white flour, and these cause imbalances and problems. The synthetic B vitamins and folic acid and the inorganic iron. And then bleaching agents. Very little testing has been done on the bleaching agents used in white flour. Another way that we're cruel to our grains is that we grind them at very high temperatures, and this causes the fatty acids to become rancid. This is the stone grinder in the village that Dr. Price visited. You want to grind your grains with a stone grinder because it's not too hot, and it doesn't cause the fatty acids, the essential fatty acids, to become rancid. For example, if you're purchasing whole wheat flour, you want to make sure it says stone ground so that it is not ground at very high temperatures. We recommend if you do a lot of baking and cooking with flour that you get a grain grinder. This is a Jupiter mill. It actually has a stone in here, and it grinds the grain at low temperature. You get a very nice, fine, whole grain flour. Breads, commercial breads. I spent a long time in the supermarket reading all the labels on the breads to see if there was anything from the supermarket that we could put in our shopping guide. Because our shopping guide is designed to allow people to even shop in a supermarket, but we've struck out on the breads. I just couldn't find one that we could recommend. They are full of additives. Many of them have trans fats in them. Many of them now have soy flour in them, which people react to. Most are made with white flour, and the few that are made of whole wheat flour are made of flour ground at very high temperatures. And none of them are properly prepared. There's no sourdough preparation of these breads. But there are good breads available, breads for sandwiches, sourdough breads, and we're getting more and more available. We have some exhibitors here. And please use the Weston A. Price Foundation shopping guide for buying your bread. Remember what we said earlier, the proper preparation of seed foods imitates the natural factors that neutralize the preservatives in the seed and allow it to sprout. And these are moisture, warmth, slight acidity, and time. We are not an organization that tells people not to eat grains, because there are many good things in grains, and many healthy populations consume grains. But there are also many bad things in whole grains, especially if they're not prepared properly. The phytic acid, which is a mineral blocker, the enzyme inhibitors, fiber, which can be very irritating, rancid fatty acids, and even altered proteins if the grains are not prepared properly. Well, does anyone know what this is? This is called an extruder. And this is the machine that's used for making breakfast cereals. And this represents extreme cruelty to our grains. What they do is they make a paste. They soak the grains in a little water. They make a paste. They put it in this tank. And then with these side wings closed, they force the grains out this tiny hole at very high temperature and pressure. And depending on the shape of this hole, you get a cornflake or a Cheerio or shredded wheat or any of these types of breakfast cereals. Puffed oats and puffed wheat are also made this way. They will not puff by themselves. They have to be forced at very high temperatures and pressure. Now, Americans eat billions of boxes of cereal every year. This is a huge industry and a very powerful industry, and this industry has convinced the FDA that there's no difference between a grain of wheat a normal grain of wheat, and a grain of wheat that's been extruded. And if you do a literature search, you will not find a single published paper on this subject, on either animals or humans, on the effects of extrusion, eating extruded grains, on their health. That's how powerful this industry is. It's kept everything out of the literature that might even give us an idea of what happens when we extrude these grains. I do know, however, of 2 unpublished studies on extruded grains. One was described in a book called Fighting the Food Giants by Paul Stitt. He worked for a cereal company, and he discovered this study in their files. They had looked at puffed wheat, and they had 4 groups of rats. The first group of rats got normal wheat and water. The second group of rats got water and vitamins. The third group of rats got water alone. And the fourth group of rats got all of the puffed wheat that they wanted to eat and water. The first group of rats lived over a year. No real health problems. The second group of rats lived for 6 weeks. There's a lesson right there. We can't live on vitamins alone. The third group of rats died at 4 weeks. The group of rats that got all the puffed wheat they wanted, they died at 2 weeks. So 2 weeks versus a year. Extruded wheat versus regular wheat. I think there's a difference there, but the FDA says there's no difference. The second study was done by a man named Laurent Zanier, who did not publish it, but he described it to me on the phone. He had 3 groups of rats. One group of rats was fed normal rat chow. The second group of rats was fed cornflakes, and the third group of rats was fed the box that the cornflakes came in. The group of rats on the rat chow lived about a year. The group of rats that was given the box lived longer than the group of rats given the cornflakes. The last cornflake rat died on the day the first box rat died. Now, the rats who got the box died of starvation. They lay down in their cages and became listless, and they just died. But the rats who got the cornflakes became agitated and began to run around in their cages and bite each other and have fits and seizures, and they died of convulsions. And then they did an autopsy, and they found lesions. This is abnormalities in the gut and on the nerves. So there was something very toxic to the nervous system about the cornflakes. Now, in my literature search, I did find one study that somehow slipped past the censors, and it was a microscope study where they looked at the proteins in grains. And the proteins in grains are bound up in what is called organelles, in organized groups or clumps. And when they go through this extrusion process, very high heat and high temperature, they are broken up and warped and distorted. Does it sound familiar? Sounds like pasteurization, doesn't it? We need to be very careful of proteins, especially the proteins in grains and milk, because they are fragile, and once they get warped and distorted, they become toxic. And obviously, in the case of the proteins in grains, they become neurotoxic. Now, here we have a supermarket with a whole row of extruded breakfast cereals, and this photograph was taken in a health food store. And these are organic grains, right? And they don't have any artificial colors. They don't have any sugar. These are good for you cereals, right? The thing about organic grains, whole grains, first they have more protein, and organic grains have more protein than non-organic grains. So the likelihood is you're going to get more of these toxic, neurotoxic protein fragments in the health food cereals than you would if you were buying Cocoa Puffs in the supermarket. And we have a generation of children who starts out each morning eating these breakfast cereals. Do you think there's a connection between the fact that these kids can't sit still in school and have behavior problems and can't concentrate and can't learn, and these extruded breakfast cereals? I think that there's a connection. I call this a cruel breakfast. This is all bran, extruded cereal. By the way, very high in phytic acid, so you're going to get zinc deficiencies, and extruded, so you have the neurotoxic proteins. This is, a lot of men start eating these cereals when they hit that midlife crisis, and they want to get healthy. This is not going to help them. And skim milk, no fat-soluble activators, pasteurized. And then we have the orange juice. Do you want me to tell you about the orange juice? Processed orange juice, very high in fructose, very high in pesticides. They put some really horrible pesticides on the oranges. And the way orange juice is made today, the process, actually, they put the skins and everything in the processor to press out the juice, and then they put enzymes in there to get everything they can out of the skin. So all of the pesticides will end up in the juice. What we do, we squeeze an orange or a grapefruit into a glass, add sparkling water, have spritzers, organic orange or organic grapefruit. Important to have a good breakfast, get a good start on the day. Good pastured eggs and bacon. We always fry some fruit in the bacon fat. It's just delicious. Really makes a wonderful breakfast. Bananas, pineapple, apricots, apples. Put them in with the bacon. Scrambled eggs made with butter and cream. If you've got some leftover potatoes from the night before, grate those up, and wonderful breakfast. We're big on smoothies. Make your own smoothies. Whole yogurt, egg yolks, fruit, and coconut oil makes a wonderful smoothie, very nutritious, tastes good. The yolks are fine raw, but not the whites. You don't want to eat a lot of raw egg whites. But suppose you want to have cereal for breakfast. Well, instead of our cruel breakfast, we're going to have a good grain breakfast. We're going to have some oatmeal or rolled oats. And we start with good quality rolled oats. And the night before, we're going to soak those oats in warm water and a tablespoon or two of something acidic, such as whey, yogurt, vinegar, or lemon juice. And you put those in the bowl and cover over and leave that on the counter overnight. So you have moisture, warmth, slight acidity, and time. And while you're fast asleep with your simple stomach, all the little gremlins in there, the enzymes and bacteria and everything, are digesting that oatmeal for you so that you don't have to do all that digesting. The next morning, we bring some more water to a boil. We add some good unrefined salt. We add our soaked oats. They cook very quickly because you've soaked them overnight. And there we have our delicious oatmeal or porridge. You might want to put some chopped nuts on the porridge. We like to put pine nuts on our oatmeal, or some coconut. Anybody here like sweet things? A good place to put a natural sweetener like maple syrup or honey or rapadura. And then, of course, you want to put some butter or cream to get your fat-soluble activators. Oats are really rich in minerals, and because you've soaked those oats, they will be very available. And you don't want to eat a high-carb meal without fats anyway, because fats will keep you from having that blood sugar spike. So we want to add cream or butter. I prefer butter on my oatmeal. It's really good to put butter on hot oatmeal. And I usually put about a half a stick of butter on my oatmeal. About 4 tablespoons of butter. You can put more on if you want to. And if your children are loading on the butter onto their oatmeal, let them. They're sending you a message. Our children are fat-starved. We hear stories of children put on low-fat diets and going to a friend's house. Mother's making bacon. She leaves a pound of cooked bacon on the counter and comes back and it's all gone. Because this child has eaten the bacon. They're absolutely starved for fats. So let your children have as much butter as they want on their oatmeal. A very popular recipe from Nourishing Traditions are the sourdough pancakes. How many of you have tried the pancakes? We get lots of testimonials about the pancakes. So the night before, while your children are doing the dishes, right? You grind your flour, and then you soak equal parts of the flour in a good quality whole yogurt or kefir or buttermilk. Leave that overnight. There's your moisture, warmth, slight acidity, and time. And the next day, you add your beaten eggs, melted butter, some baking soda, and salt, maybe a little maple syrup. And there's your delicious pancakes. Take a little bit longer to cook than a white flour pancake, but they really are very light. You can hardly believe that you're eating a pancake that's 100% whole wheat or whole grain. And of course, you want to serve your pancakes with some butter. This is too much butter. So here are the pancakes, and I put some melted butter, maple syrup. This red stuff is a lacto-fermented raspberry syrup. And this looks like sausage, and if you can get some good quality sausage, that's great. But these are actually the roe cakes, the shad roe cakes from Nourishing Traditions, which don't have a fishy taste. In the spring, when the shad roe comes in, we make these and freeze them, and they're really delicious. So here we have a wonderful breakfast, all the principles of nourishing traditional diets. We have soaked grains, we have a natural sweetener, we have a lacto-fermented food, and 2 sacred foods, the butter and the fish eggs. A very versatile and useful recipe from Nourishing Traditions is the yogurt dough, which is made by mixing freshly ground whole grain flour. This is whole grain, the photo is a little bit washed out. Butter, yogurt, and salt, and it makes a very thick dough. You leave that on the counter for overnight for 12 hours. I use a little unbleached white flour for rolling the dough, and we've used it to make quiche, which is just a fancy name for cheese and egg pie. This is a very versatile crust, and it has a good taste, it's tender and easy to work with. And we've served our very rich fatty food with some lacto-fermented carrots and a lacto-fermented beverage. In this case, it's kombucha. The fermented foods go very well with fats, and those of you who are getting back into eating fats and have trouble digesting fats, be sure that you're eating them with the lacto-fermented foods. You can also roll out the dough in small rounds and make a filling and make empanadas or pasties. Anything left over, any chopped meat or rice, make it nice and spicy. And this is a great place to hide organ meats. Chopped up fine, your children will never know. We used to make these in big batches and individually wrap them in aluminum foil and freeze them. Be sure to remove the aluminum foil before you bake them. Brush them with some butter. And this is a complete meal, a complete handheld fast food meal. Nuts are seeds, and we treat the nuts a little bit differently. The problem with nuts is not phytic acid, but enzyme inhibitors. We soak the nuts in salt water. These are raw macadamia nuts. Soak for 6 to 8 hours, then we drain and we spread them out on a stainless steel pan and bake them in a warm oven, or we can put them in a dehydrator till they get completely dry and crisp. And we call these crispy nuts, and these make a wonderful snack and have been a very popular item from Nourishing Traditions. So here we have crispy almonds. The crispy pecans develop a beautiful buttery flavor. I even buy the slivered almonds and do them that way also. Crispy cashews and the pepitas. These can be kept at room temperature, except for the crispy walnuts. Walnuts are very high in omega-3, so we keep the walnuts in the freezer. But most of these can be kept at room temperature. They make a great snack to keep in your classroom, on your tractor, in your car, at work, in the kitchen. We put these in children's lunches, and we always travel with crispy nuts. They make a great snack. And in fact, crispy nuts and a hunk of raw cheese is a complete meal. Very simple, complete meal. The crispy nuts are the basis for a lot of the cookie recipes in Nourishing Traditions. Okay, number 7. Make stock, and by stock, we mean bone broth, at least once a week. The easiest stock to make is chicken stock. You can use a whole chicken or chicken parts, chicken bones. You can use the bones from a chicken you've already eaten. If you can get the feet, put those in. There's a lot of gelatin in the feet. You add filtered water, some vegetables. You always add a little vinegar. Vinegar helps the calcium and the other nutrients come out into the water. So bring that up to a simmer. You'll get some scum that rises to the top. Be sure to take that off. That's one of the secrets of the French chefs, is to skim. And then just simmer for as long as you like. A stock pot is really good for this. In fact, I think of young people working not much time. You buy a chicken at Whole Foods, eat the chicken, you've got all those bones left over, throw them in a stock pot with some vinegar. You come home from work and put a half a cup of brown rice in there, some vegetables, and now you've got chicken soup. Add some cream or coconut milk. We have a South American proverb, good broth resurrects the dead. Oh dear. Chicken heads. My daughter took this photograph in the Himalayas. It was a market, and people were buying these chicken heads. What were they buying them for? To make chicken soup. So the heads have always been valued, and you buy a chicken in France, you get the head and the feet. Here in the States, Tyson's exports all the heads and feet to China. You get a better price for them in China than they do here. But our Amish farmers will sell you the heads and feet, so take advantage of that. Fish broth is easy to make. You use the head and the carcass. Once again, you add some vinegar. And fish broth gels beautifully. A lot of gelatin in the fish carcass. And this is a wonderful food. It's a very nourishing food, rich in factors that protect the thyroid gland. Those people from South America really know a lot about broth. They have another saying, fish broth will cure anything. And the beef broth is a little more complicated. You use a variety of bones. We recommend that you brown them in the oven first, so you get a nice flavor and color in your broth. If you can get some feet, put those in. I get our farmers to cut the feet into chunks, so there's a lot of surface area. Once again, you're going to add some vinegar, and that makes a beautiful broth. Now, this is a typical fast food in a place like Korea. It's made in mom and pop shops. They have these big cauldrons. They make the beef broth, and then they sell the soup. And they add some noodles and sell the soup. It's very nourishing and very nutritious. And that's what we need. We need these mom and pop shops making broth everywhere in every town. I think we need a brothel in every town. Until we get our brothels, we're going to have to make our own stock. Now, this is what they call in France a reduction. They start with several quarts of broth, and then they boil it down until it becomes concentrated and thick, and the gelatin makes it become thick, so you have a thick, clear sauce. That's the magic in traditional gourmet cooking, is the reduction of a gelatin-rich broth. And you can add wine and herbs. You can add butter, cream, mustard, all sorts of things to the sauce, but the basis is the stock. And when you put this concentrated stock on your food, on a piece of meat or a piece of fish, you're getting the goodness from all the bones in addition to the meat. And suddenly your food becomes very, very satisfying. And you actually end up not eating very much because the food is so satisfying. Now, here is a collection of foods that has that broth-like taste. And by the way, you have a taste bud for that taste. It's called umami. That means your body needs broth. It needs whatever it is that satisfies that taste bud. Well, these are foods that stimulate that taste bud but don't provide the nourishment of broth. So we have bouillon cubes and dressings and sauces, dehydrated soups, sauce mixes, flavored rice, and here we have a piece of mystery meat with a gravy on it. Now, traditionally, gravy's made with the good fat and the drippings, a little flour, and the stock. And gravy made that way is very, very nutritious, very good for your nervous system, full of wonderful calcium, full of gelatin for digestion. This is just water, a coloring, a thickening, and a flavor. And the flavor is MSG. So basically what you're giving your body is, you're tricking your body. You're not giving your body anything. You're just stimulating that taste bud, and the body just ends up disappointed and actually almost addicted to this stuff. And MSG has been linked to many serious diseases, diabetes, migraines, headaches. It makes you get fat. When they feed MSG to animals, they become obese. Autism, ADHD, Alzheimer's. It's a very serious thing in our food supply and a very good reason to avoid all of these processed foods. And believe me, MSG is in all processed foods. It's not on the label, but it's in the foods. And here are some of the things that they call MSG, or items that contain MSG. Anything hydrolyzed, autolyzed, soy products are very high in MSG. Sodium caseinate, calcium caseinate, anything extracted, all of these processes either add MSG or create MSG. And MSG is the base of all of these fake flavors. This is an advertisement in a food chemistry magazine. And the industry is very proud of this. They can imitate any flavor. It's not just beef flavor. They can imitate beef stew. They can imitate a hamburger cooked on the grill or a hamburger cooked in a pan. There's different flavors for this. Smoked beef. They can imitate any flavor, and they're very proud of it. And the basis of these imitations is MSG. And that's the goal, to create artificial foods, synthetic foods, made with the products of commodity agriculture and then flavored to imitate the real foods. Okay, number 8. You thought I wasn't going to get to the vegetables, did you? I like vegetables. Come home with a cart full of vegetables, but I'm under no illusions that vegetables are a luxury, and they're not particularly good sources of nutrients compared to these nutrient-dense animal foods, but they're great vehicles for animal fats, for butter, for cream, for lard. So eat a variety of fresh vegetables and fruits, preferably organic. Do the best you can, but don't make an obsession about having everything organic. Probably good to know which fruits and vegetables are highest in pesticides, and these are the ones that I always try to get organic, if I can. Some vegetables are low in fiber and can be eaten raw. They've been developed that way. They've been bred to be low in fiber and edible when they're raw. And now that you know how to make your own salad dressing, you can be an artist with your salads. And just use your imagination and make up all sorts of wonderful salads. But most vegetables should be eaten cooked. The leafy green vegetables, such as spinach, chard, beet greens, and so forth, contain calcium-blocking oxalic acid, and this is neutralized by cooking. The cruciferous vegetables, such as cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and broccoli, contain goitrogens, and these are somewhat neutralized by cooking. You don't want to overdo on these types of vegetables, even cooked. And there's many vegetables that are impossible to eat when raw or have a lot more nourishment when they're cooked. I recently received an all-raw cookbook, and on the front cover was a picture of an artichoke. And I thought, now, are they trying to eat artichokes raw? Potatoes have a toxin when they're raw. They should be cooked. So the leafy green vegetables, we steam them. This is spinach. I've washed the spinach and just put it in a pan with the water adhering to the leaves and steam it. Depending on how mature that spinach is, steam it for 5 to 8 minutes and then transfer it to a bowl and always add butter. That's what vegetables are for, butter and cream. And I usually do this just before we sit down to dinner. We might start with a salad or a bowl of soup, and I just put the vegetables in a warm oven and let the butter melt. Broccoli is a cruciferous vegetable. You want to steam this, not eat it raw. This is a 2-part vegetable steamer. Water in the bottom, holes in the top. Cut the broccoli into little pieces, equal size, and steam it until it turns bright green and you can stick a fork through it. So there's some discussion in our family of how long the broccoli should be cooked. But anyway, it should be tender. And then you add butter and let the butter melt. Plenty of butter. Anyone here not like vegetables? Don't be shy. There's usually 1 or 2 in every group. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. We have ways of making you eat vegetables. And the way you get people who don't like vegetables to eat vegetables is to make soup. And we're going to make some lentil soup. This is a very good recipe for the budget conscious. Weston Price was very big on lentils. He often recommended them, but and because they're a very rich source of phosphorus. But lentils are a legume. They're a seed, so they do need to be soaked. They're a small seed. They don't need to be soaked as long as other types of legumes. So let's say you're rushing out the door in the morning. You think, oh my goodness, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Let's have lentil soup. And you put the lentils into soak before you go to work. And when you come back from work, you then chop up some root vegetables, whatever's in your bottom drawer in the refrigerator. Carrots, leeks, onions, turnips. You could put turnips in there. And just let those simmer away in some butter while you go off and do something else. And that'll take about an hour. And that's when it's time to add the soaked lentils. You drain them first and add them. And then the chicken broth that you made over the weekend. Remember, you make chicken broth once a week. And add that. And when the lentils are soft, and that doesn't take very long, about 10 minutes, that's when you add your green vegetables. And I usually add zucchini to the soup. Zucchini is a wonderful vegetable. It's high in sodium, and it's very good for stress. But it was very stressful for me to get my kids to eat zucchini. They hated it. But if I put it in the soup, they didn't even know. So when the zucchini is tender, and that doesn't take long, maybe 10 minutes, that's when we get out our little handheld blender. How many of you have a handheld blender? Wonderful. Very inexpensive, most important piece of equipment in your kitchen. You just blend that soup right in the pot, and there you have a beautiful cream soup. No more extra dishes to wash, no grinders or blenders or anything. And there's our beautiful creamy lentil soup. Now's the time to add flavorings. It needs something sour. A little vinegar or lemon juice, some salt. You might want to add some curry powder, whatever you want to flavor it. You might have some leftover sausage or meat in the fridge. You can chop that up and add to the soup. And you have a really nutritious meal here. Lots of good things in the soup. The one thing you don't have now is enzymes, because this is completely cooked, right? But what we do is add some sour cream or cultured cream when the soup is in the bowl. Now, this is a very wise tradition from Europe. They don't add the cream to the pot. They add it to the bowl. And that gives you the enzymes in this cooked meal, and as well as some extra fat-soluble vitamins, even a little extra calcium. And that makes a beautiful, delicious, creamy soup. This is a soup that I often made in large batches and froze. You want to organize your life so you're not cooking every evening. Learn to do enough, so be creative with leftovers to freeze things. We're not going to make an obsession about cooking every night. And also, the cook should not be washing dishes. That was the rule in our house. Cook does not wash dishes. Okay, here's a test for you. Name this product. The first ingredient is water. The second ingredient is sugar. Then maltodextrin, which is another type of sweetener made from corn. Calcium and sodium caseinate. Calcium caseinate is Elmer's glue. That's the fourth ingredient in this. And remember that calcium and sodium caseinates have a lot of MSG in them. Then safflower oil, soy protein isolate, canola oil, soy oil. These are processed oils. And then a huge list of artificial vitamins. This is a food processor's dream here. Not quite. This is Ensure. This is baby formula for grown-ups. And this is what they give to people after they've come out of operations in the hospitals. And this is why operations don't go well and people don't recover, because this is not food. This is garbage. Sometimes it is important to have operations. Please don't turn your back on the miracles of modern medicine, because there are a few. I'm not talking about all the drugs and everything, but the miracles of surgery. You may have an accident. You may have a problem because of poor eating for a lifetime that needs fixed. So there are reasons to sometimes have surgery, but if you're having surgery, make sure that you get your family to bring your food to you and have soups, broths, smoothies, and so forth. And you will recover. And your doctor will be very pleased because he can't do anything about the food in the hospital. That's in the hands of the dietitians. And there's nothing he can do. But you can bring the patient the food and make sure that the hospital knows that you will be bringing the food. All right, number 9. I could spend a whole day on this slide, but I only have a few minutes. So avoid the things that are going to stress your body the most and cause your body to use up nutrients. You're not going to be 100% on this, but remember it's always a balance between having a lot of nutrients and then avoiding things that are going to deplete you of nutrients. So the first one, and I'm sorry to have to mention this, is caffeine and other drugs. And believe me, caffeine is a drug. We'll come back to this in a moment. Exposure to pesticides and environmental toxins, try to avoid them if you can. Amalgam fillings and root canals. Dr. Price wrote 1,000 pages on the dangers of root canals. Now, if you have a root canal and you're doing fine and don't have a health problem, leave it be. But if you've got a serious health problem, if you've got cancer, something that's not clearing up, chronic fatigue, the first thing I would look at is getting that root canal out of your mouth. It's better to pull the tooth than put a root canal in. Vaccinations. There's at least 4 neurotoxins in vaccinations, not just the mercury. It's formaldehyde, aluminum, and MSG. There's MSG in vaccinations that goes straight to the bloodstream. Now, the next 2 are 2 components that we are better off than the traditional people: extremes of heat and cold, and dirty food, water, and clothes. We sometimes forget what the blessings of technology have brought us, and they have resulted in less stress to the body. We don't have to be out in the cold. We don't have to sleep on dirty beds. Stale air, synthetic fabrics, especially worn close to the body, strong electromagnetic fields. You don't want to live under power lines. You don't want to have an electric blanket. You don't want to have an electric clock next to your bed. Try to avoid being real close to these strong fields. Loud syncopated music, very tiring. Partial spectrum fluorescent lights. If you work in an office with these lights, go outside for your coffee break. Get some fresh air and natural light. It'll do far more good for you than a cup of coffee. Microwave food, very tiring. And I'm concerned about the health implications of microwave food. You know, in hospitals, in the preemie ward with the premature babies, they have frozen mother's milk. And they are not allowed to heat that milk in the microwave. They have to heat it in a bottle warmer. Why? Because when they give microwaved milk to the premature babies, they die. And they die of kidney failure. Now, we don't die if we eat a meal of microwave food, but if we eat many meals of microwave food, what's happening? I think it's better to err on the side of caution. Cell phones, please minimize your use of cell phones. And high heels, very tiring. There's lots of beautiful flats out there, gals. You don't need to wear high heels. So what's so wrong with caffeine? This is a diagram of the adrenal glands. This is a very important organ that sits on top of your kidneys and that produces a lot of important hormones, and it helps your body deal with stress. And there's 2 parts of the adrenal gland. The adrenal medulla, the center part, is what produces adrenaline for fight or flight. And I've made that red. That's for emergencies. And then the adrenal cortex produces all the chill out, calming, healing hormones that bring you back to homeostasis. Now, the body was not designed to always be in an adrenaline rush. And the traditional cultures understood this beautifully. The men had to get an adrenaline rush to go hunting or go to war or whatever, and they had special ceremonies to get their adrenaline pumping. But they did not do this every day. And the men's work tended to be bursts of high stress activity alternating with just sort of standing around and sharpening their spears and gossiping for a couple of weeks. It wasn't always fight or flight, whereas the women's work was more steady. I'm not being sexist here. I'm just saying that if anybody, male or female, has a high stress job, these people really need to relax and heal the adrenal glands. Now, what's the problem with coffee and also with sugar? Coffee and sugar stimulate the adrenal medulla to produce adrenaline, and that's what gives you a lift. That's what wakes you up with the coffee. So then the adrenal cortex has to work very hard to bring you into homeostasis, and the body's not designed to do that all the time, to have this rush of adrenaline. And pretty soon the adrenals run out. They become exhausted. It's called adrenal exhaustion with this constant stimulation. And that's when we can no longer deal with stress. And that's when you start seeing the allergies, behavior problems, autoimmune diseases, is when you get this adrenal exhaustion. So be kind to your adrenal glands. Don't stress them too much. And that's why the coffee is the problem. Giving up coffee was the hardest thing I ever did. I was very fortunate to have a doctor who said to me, "You will never recover from your fatigue and your allergies and your stress unless you get off of coffee." And it took me about a month of headaches to do it, but it was really I was really a different person after I got off of coffee. I then had steady energy throughout the day, and the allergies started to clear up. Well, here's a study done with spiders. They gave spiders marijuana, benzodrine, chloral hydrate, and caffeine. And the most chaotic web was spun by the spider on caffeine. And the satirical newspaper, The Onion, brain forced to run entire body on muffin and frappuccino. We live downtown now, and we see all these young people going to work, and they're walking along with the coffee from you-know-who, and the big donut or muffin on their cell phones, and the ladies and the girls in high heels. Okay, you know, it's just a recipe for burning out by the time you're 30 years old. Okay, so instead of junk food based on sugar, white flour, and trans fats, start your day on real food: eggs, meat, cheese, pâté, liverwurst, meat, nuts, and so forth. Instead of caffeine beverages, drink whole raw milk, broth-based soups, kombucha, and other lacto-fermented beverages. Feed your body. Don't get energy by whipping your adrenal glands into action, but give yourself energy by feeding the body. Number 10, put the principles of lacto-fermentation to work for you. Familiar lacto-fermented foods include natural cheese and yogurt, old-fashioned pickles and sauerkraut, and gravlax, which is lacto-fermented salmon. And these are examples from my book, Nourishing Traditions. These are lacto-fermented beets, carrots, cabbage, pineapple, raspberries, and apricot butter. And these are eaten as condiments in small amounts with cooked foods. And I like to think of these as super raw foods. They more than compensate for the enzymes and bacteria loss in the foods you normally cook, because they're so concentrated in enzymes and good bacteria. Fermentation is simply a process whereby sugar is transformed into something else. There's two basic types of fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation is the action of yeasts on sugars to produce alcohol and also some carbon dioxide. Lactic acid fermentation is the action of bacteria on sugars, and they produce lactic acid. Both alcohol and lactic acid are preservatives, but the lactic acid doesn't make you drunk. And it's very important to have lactic acid in the digestive tract. I know you understand about lactic acid being in your cells, and that's what makes you stiff after exercising. You don't want that to happen, but in a healthy digestive tract, you have lactic acid producing bacteria the whole length of the digestive tract, and you want to have lactic acid in the digestive tract. So, lactofermentation of vegetables, fruits, nuts, grains, dairy products, and meats is a preservation method that increases vitamin and enzyme content, The vitamin C content of cabbage, for example, increases tenfold when you make sauerkraut. Also, many of the nutrients are released and made more available. B vitamins increase. The method adds lactic acid and beneficial bacteria, neutralizes anti-nutrients and improves digestibility, and breaks down difficult to digest proteins and carbohydrates. And best of all, lactofermentation can be done on a small scale on farms, and it can replace monopolistic food processing. The perfect example is a gal who called me from Vermont who grew cabbage. She had an acre. She grew an acre of cabbage every year. And normally she got about $3,000 for her acre of cabbage. Then she learned to make sauerkraut, and she spent 2 weeks working really hard making sauerkraut, and then sold the sauerkraut throughout the year. And once she made sauerkraut, that 3 acres of cabbage was worth $30,000. So that's a tenfold increase, and that's value added. That's money that stays in the community and stays on the farm. In writing Nourishing Traditions, we wanted to develop a method of making these lacto-fermented foods that was easy and foolproof and didn't require a lot of expensive equipment. So this is what we came up with. We came up with a method whereby we use mason jars, not great big crocks and expensive containers. So we use mason jars, and you need some kind of pusher or pounder. So I call this the yin and the yang of equipment. And then there's 2 special ingredients that you need for lactofermentation. One is a good unrefined sea salt, and the second is homemade whey. Whey is your inoculant. It's your source of good bacteria. So I call this the yin and the yang of ingredients. And you do need to make this whey. Please don't try to do this with powdered whey. So it's easy to make whey. The easiest way to make whey is to use yogurt or kefir. And you take a strainer or a colander and set it over a bowl and line it with a kitchen towel. And then you just dump that yogurt in and cover it with a plate and let it drip through, usually overnight. The next morning you'll have a kind of yogurt cheese, it's sometimes called quark. It's really delicious mixed with maple syrup. If you want to make a nice hard cream cheese, then you tie up that towel and you suspend it from a spoon or something and let the whey drip out. You'll end up with 2.5 cups of whey and about 1.5 cups of cream cheese. The whey will last for months in the refrigerator. And that's good because you don't use a lot at a time, and it's a very, very useful ingredient to have. The cream cheese lasts about 2 weeks, and you can use that to make cheesecake or any kind of spreads. A lot of recipes in Nourishing Traditions use that homemade cream cheese. So let's make sauerkraut, the most familiar lacto-fermented food. Here, it's very important to be organic or biodynamic. The better the quality of the foods that you're fermenting, the better the results that you're going to have. These microbes are not fooled. They know where good food is, and if they have good food, they will proliferate. We shred the cabbage, we mix it with some spices, whey, and salt, and then you pound. You pound until it becomes limp. And then you push it down into the jar very tightly until all the juices come up and cover the cabbage. You can see them there. Leave about 1 inch of space between the top of those juices and the top of the jar because it expands. It definitely expands. That's the beauty of the mason jar. There's a little bit of an escape valve there. And you have a good fermentation if stuff starts coming out this jar. You leave that on the counter for 2 or 3 days, and then at room temperature, and then you put it in the refrigerator, and in about 3 weeks you have sauerkraut. There's no vinegar, there's no sugar, there's no boiling, there's no pasteurizing. This is lactofermentation. This is completely raw. And the real thrill of lactofermentation is to open that jar, and you get a little pop, and these bubbles come up. It's a thrilling moment in the kitchen. Pickles. The challenge in the pickles is to get all those cucumbers straight up in the jar, or you can slice them. Mix some water, whey, salt, and spices. Put that in there, cover the pickles. Leave that on the counter for several days at room temperature, and then put them in the fridge, and a few weeks later you've got pickles. Very easy. This is the raspberry syrup, the lacto-fermented raspberry syrup. You can do this with any type of berry, except strawberries don't seem to work very well. So you carefully put those berries in the jar and press down very gently. Doesn't look like he's being very gentle here, but you mix some water, natural sweetener, whey, and salt, and you carefully put that in. Let it percolate down in the berries. Leave it on the counter for 2 or 3 days, and then in the refrigerator, and it's amazing how long those berries stay fresh. I've opened a jar that's 6 months old, and the berries are still fresh. This is one of my favorite recipes in the book. This is the fruit chutney made with peaches. When the organic peaches are in season, I make the peach chutney. Lots of ingredients in this one. Chopped crispy pecans, raisins, lots of different spices, lemon juice and lemon peel, a natural sweetener, whey, and salt. You mix that all together, and then you peel the peaches, cut them in chunks, into jars. Now you know the jig here. 2 or 3 days at room temperature on the kitchen counter, a couple weeks in the refrigerator, and you've got this delicious lacto-fermented peach chutney. And it will last for several months. It's amazing how well the foods are preserved with this system. Americans consume 500 million bottles of ketchup per year. Did you know that ketchup was originally a lacto-fermented food? The word ketchup comes from a Chinese word, kaotsoup, which means fermented fish sauce. Now, before the days of refrigeration, when they caught fish, they took off the fillets, and they were either eaten immediately or salted or smoked. And all the guts and soft parts of the fish went into a barrel and were covered with brine, with seawater, and the barrel was closed, and they had a spigot at the bottom. And after a few months, they opened that spigot, and what came out was called garum, the universal seasoning, basically like Worcestershire sauce. And that was what the Romans used as their basic seasoning. Now, what floated to the top was called liquidum, and that was the oil. That was cod liver oil, basically. And the Roman soldiers would not fight unless they had their liquidum every day. So they've made very good use of the fish. Now, the Chinese word for this fermented sauce that comes out the bottom, the watery part, was kaotsoup. And you could preserve things in the kaotsoup. You could put oysters in there. That was oyster kaotsoup or oyster ketchup. You could put tomatoes in there, and that was tomato ketchup. You could put mushrooms in there, and that was mushroom ketchup. And that's why they call it tomato ketchup, because there were many different types of ketchup. Well, of course, ketchup today is very different from the original ketchup. It's made with high fructose corn syrup, and almost always MSG is going to be in there. So it's a very different kind of product. But you can make your own ketchup. The recipe's in the book. You start with a good quality organic tomato paste. This is the fish sauce. Now, you can make that yourself, or you can buy the Vietnamese fish sauce. That's fine. Whey and salt, sweetener like maple syrup, some garlic, and some cayenne pepper. That's all there is. And you just mix those ingredients together. You put them in a jar, keep it at room temperature for about 3 days, and then in the fridge, and you have lacto-fermented ketchup. How many of you have tried the ketchup? How'd it work? Was it good? Mustard was also originally a lacto-fermented food, so if you're feeling very ambitious, you might want to try making mustard as well. Then we have the beverages. And I don't think it's any surprise to this group here that the soft drinks that are marketed to Americans today, to children, to people around the world, are witch's brew of concentrated sweeteners or artificial sweeteners, caffeine, phosphoric acid, which is what gives them their lift, or their bite, which is very hard on the bones, artificial colors and flavors, and who knows what else is in them, what's in the water. Lacto-fermented beverages are found in many traditional communities. They're made with diluted sweeteners. They're rich in mineral ions, enzymes, beneficial bacteria, and lactic acid. and natural flavors. And they give your body a lift by feeding the body, not by stimulating the adrenal glands. Americans consume 56 gallons per person of soft drinks per year. They've eclipsed milk in children's diets. They are an absolute scourge, and there is a crying need for a healthy replacement for something that's not alcoholic and that's not just plain water. Because actually just drinking plain water can be very depleting. The body just tries to get rid of it as fast as it can. But these lacto-fermented beverages are very nourishing. They give you a lift by feeding the body, and they also help with digestion and provide beneficial bacteria for the digestive tract. A very easy one is our lacto-fermented ginger ale. Just fresh ginger, fresh lime juice, a natural sweetener, whey, salt, and water. I'll mix those all together, leave them on the counter for a couple of days, and then put in the refrigerator. And if you want it to get fizzy, you strain it into a bottle with a good tight top, a good strong bottle, like a sparkling water bottle, and then in the fridge, and it will get fizzy. Very refreshing and nourishing beverage. I know you've all heard of kefir. These are the little grains for fermenting milk into a very nourishing fermented milk drink, but there's also grains called water kefir grains that will ferment fruit juices, and they make delicious fruit soft drinks. The recipes for these are in Eat Fat, Lose Fat, and here they are in the jar. That's what they look like. They're little pale little things, like small little grains, and they really make a nice fizzy drink. And they also multiply very well. A medicinal drink from Nourishing Traditions is the beet kvass, which is made with chopped up beets, whey, salt, and water. That's left on the counter for a few days, and then in the fridge in a couple weeks. You have a very nourishing lacto-fermented beverage that's more medicinal than Epicurean. I wouldn't really serve this at a dinner party. But this is my medicine. I drink beet kvass morning and night. It's very good for digestion, very detoxifying, and beets are very rich in a substance called betaine. And betaine has an unusual property in that it spares B12. So you can go a lot longer on the B12 that you're consuming. Might be a very good beverage for lacto-ovo-vegetarians. There are some soft drinks being made commercially. One is called kombucha. Kvass is a Russian drink made with stale rye bread. That's the bread kvass. And the fermented grain drink that comes from Australia called Grainfields. And all of these beverages are available at our conference today, including many artisan soft drinks at our soda bar. So please visit the soda bar and have delicious old-fashioned root beer ginger ale, spruce beer. We have some cream sodas made with wonderful Amish cream. I don't think you can find another conference in the U.S. where they're serving lacto-fermented sodas. Very unique. And my goal here, our goal, is a cottage industry throughout the United States. Every town, every hamlet in this nation producing its own lacto-fermented beverage with a product that's unique to the area. Maybe it's an herb, maybe it's a fruit that grows there. Can you imagine what fun it will be to travel across the United States and taste all these wonderful local lacto-fermented sodas? And what that will also do is keep the money in the community. Every time you drink a commercial soft drink, your money goes to a multinational corporation. This is what I call coca colonization. This photograph was taken in Zimbabwe. It's shocking to be in Zimbabwe. You see these big rubber Coke bottles all over in street corners and in front of stores, and this is at the airport. And what happens when these soft drink companies start bottling in these third world countries is that it pushes out the local lacto-fermented beverage. And people think that only poor people drink these old-fashioned beverages, and rich people and chic people and cool people drink the soft drinks. The lacto-fermented beverage in Africa is made with sorghum. It's a type of slightly alcoholic beer. It's definitely an acquired taste, I have to say, but it was drunk in preference to water when they were working outside and gave people a lot of strength and energy. But now that's considered something that only poor people drink. This is a shocking photograph. So here they are wonderful Amish people living in houses without electricity, and these kids have come up to spend their money on Coca-Cola. Okay, so we've come to number 11 now, and number 11 gets us a little bit beyond food, really, but still something that strongly affects our health, and it's also very scientific, and that is to practice forgiveness. When you're upset, when you're angry with someone, it's very difficult to digest your food. We know this from the science. Very difficult to absorb the nutrients. We had a rule at the home, no unpleasant conversation at the dinner table, no unpleasant conversation at meals, and no scoldings at meals. That's not fair to scold a child in front of the others. The scoldings they did occur, but not at meals. So come to meals, feeling at peace. Practice forgiveness. The first person that you forgive is yourself. And I'm always of two minds when I start giving this seminar, because I know that all of you are going to feel terrible about things that have happened, that you've done. And I'm the same. I made many, many mistakes with myself and with my children. So we were all just doing the best we can, and we all did it. It's not your fault. It was just the relentless propaganda, the trying to get away from being old-fashioned, and trying to come into the modern age, which is a great thing. We want to be thankful for all the wonderful things that technology has given to us. So practice forgiveness, and first forgive yourself. Forgive your parents. They were just doing the best that they could, and with the knowledge that they had. And then you also forgive your children, especially your teenagers. They really do rejoin the human race sooner or later. They will come back to being human. Forgive these people. This is unmitigated evil, no question. But it's an evil system. And these people are trapped in this system. Even the people who run these companies are trapped in a system. And the only way that you're going to free them and liberate them from this system is not to drink their products. So we forgive these people too. As Edgar Cayce said, make your stumbling blocks into stepping stones. So all of these challenges that we have, use them for something to make you into a better person. There's a reason we have evil on the planet. If we didn't have evil, we'd turn into spiritual couch potatoes. We'd never make any progress on the spiritual path without evil. This beautiful lady is 100. She died at 104. She's gone now, but this was taken at about 102. She lives in Ecuador, and she's the grandmother of a friend of mine. And she practices everything that I've talked about. She's made her own food all her life. Even up to great old age, she prepared her own food. She went to the market every day. She eats meat. She cooked all the bones. She always had a pot of broth on the stove. She soaked her grains, soaked her barley before she put it in the soup. She made her own cheese and had whey, and she drank the whey. That was her lacto-fermented food. She used butter, used animal fats. Also a very spiritual person, a real pillar of strength in her community, very respected as an elder. Of course, we are looking to the next generation. This is the age that we must reach if we are going to turn this around. The physical degeneration that Dr. Price described, and the great epidemic of disease and infertility that he predicted would happen. So we've talked a lot about cooking today, and I'd like to finish by reading you a quote about cooking and getting you inspired to go back into the kitchen. We think of cooking as kind of a menial job, and that impression has been deliberately created by the food industry for you to think that that's beneath you. It's beneath you to cook. So, if a woman could see the sparks of light going forth from her fingertips when she is cooking, and the substance of light that goes into the food that she handles. She would be amazed to see how much of herself she charges into the meals that she prepares for her family and friends. It is one of the most important and least understood activities of life, that the radiation and feeling that go into the preparation of food affect everyone who partakes of it. And this activity should be unhurried, peaceful, and happy. It would be better that an individual did not eat at all than to eat food that has been prepared under a feeling of anger, resentment, depression, or any outward pressure. Think of the vibration that's in factory foods, that's in fast foods prepared by people on slave wages in terrible conditions. So it would be better that an individual did not eat at all than to eat food that has been prepared under a feeling of anger, resentment, depression, or any outward pressure. Because the substance of the life stream performing the service flows into that food and is eaten and actually becomes a part of the energy of the receiver. That is why the advanced spiritual teachers of the East never eat food prepared by anyone other than their own chelas, their own students. Conversely, if the one preparing the food is the only one in the household who is spiritually advanced. Now let's just consider what that means here. We're all on a path, they call it the spiritual path, and there's a goal that we're moving towards. And I personally believe in universal salvation, believe that everyone eventually will get to that goal, even the heads of soft drink companies. You can call that goal heaven, enlightenment, nirvana. I don't know everyone has a different name for it, but there is a goal that we're heading towards. And people are at different levels along that path. Some people are sort of up in front, and some people are lagging behind. Everyone's going to get there, but some people are a little bit more spiritually advanced than others. And those people who are all spiritually advanced were not all put down in the same household or in the same village so they could pat each other on the back and congratulate each other and think what a great job we're doing. They're sprinkled around like salt. And very often in a family you'll have one person who's a little bit further along in that path than the others. And I see heads nodding because I have a feeling that a lot of you are in that situation where you're the one who's a little bit further ahead, thinking about the changes that have to be made and wondering how you're going to bring the others along without preaching to them, without becoming a nag. So how do we do this? Well, here's how you do it. If the one preparing the food is the only one in the household who is spiritually advanced and an active charge of happiness, purity, and peace pours forth into the food from him, this pours forth into the other members and blesses them. So that's how you do it. You do it by being the cook in the family. I might say that there are more ways than one of allowing the Spirit of God to enter the flesh of man. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.